Today we are going to be talking about victory points and that type of subsystem in general, and how you'd use them / how you'd make them yourself. So let's first get started. I just want to mention that there is a list of all the subsystems here on Archives Nethys. I'm going to have this link in the description. It goes over a lot of information about subsystems. It goes over examples. It goes over when you'd use them. It then goes over different types of victory points. So a lot of this information is also in written form here, and you can find more in-depth examples online via this source. But with that being said, this video should be a good jumping off point for understanding what victory points are and how you would use them. If you are a player watching this video, you can keep on watching to see how some of the GM prep works, and if you're looking for optimization tips for skill challenges, pick skills that your GM will likely build challenges around, and be able to think creatively regarding your skills. Okay, with all the players now having left the video, now that I have had them watch an ad, let's go ahead and talk about the other stuff. So, the first thing to consider when you are deciding, do I want to use a subsystem, is what is your intent with this subsystem? Are you intending for this to be a tracking aid throughout the campaign, which is basically what the reputation subsystem is, if you want an example of that? Is it something that is more going to be just a one-off event that it's kind of hard to run with normal combat rules and exploration isn't quite good enough, which is more or less what chases are? Is it representing some kind of larger thing the players need to piece together or accomplish, which is effectively what research is doing? Or is it more of a maybe 3 sessions, they come and go in and out of this depending on if things are around? And that's more of what influence is. Sometimes during downtime there might be a party, they can peruse with the NPCs, or they can try and convince somebody. And it's not just a one and done persuasion check. This is my second note, by the way. If it is going to be short enough to where it resolves in like 10 minutes after only a few dice rolls, don't make it a victory point subsystem. Just say it's happening, let the players make their skill checks, call it a day. You should really only use a subsystem when you think it is going to take half an hour or more of session time / be a tracking aid that you use for more than half an hour. And my other note on when you'd use these, third note, if we're keeping track, I think, maybe it's fourth, I don't know, I'm not keeping track, somebody at home can, is to keep it abstract. The point of victory points is that set a number that the players are trying to meet, or they're trying to not lose, or whatever. If you are running a siege, this lets you gloss over the exact logistics of how all that works, because 1, you probably aren't an expert in it, and 2, your players are probably not experts in it, and even if 1 and 2 are both wrong, 3rd, you may not be coming to a Pathfinder 2e table to talk about the exact logistics of medieval towns during a siege. If you are, totally fine, good for you. But for most of us laymen, we do not need that level of detail. We just kind of want our fantasy game to let us interact with the narrative, give us the points that rate how well we did, and then we move on. So victory points, you want to keep that level of abstraction there. But at the same time, you also want to keep it fresh. Now, what do I mean by keeping it fresh? So for this, I'm going to use an example of the D&D 4e skill challenges, because I think they're a very good, bad example of this. Because a lot of the D&D 4e skill challenges are stuff like, there is a unicorn running around, and you need to capture it. The players may make this many successful persuasion checks, this many successful athletics checks to try and wrangle it, or they have the unicorn run wild after this many failures. And so it just devolves into everybody rolls dice until the encounter's over. What I mean by keep it fresh is insert new elements that have the scenario evolve. So I'm going to use an example from my ship battle subsystem that I wrote for a game that I ran recently. And I specifically wrote in different ranges so that different abilities and different problems come up that the players then need to deal with. So that is my way of keeping it fresh there. In chases, you have obstacles to put different challenges in their way. In influence, there's kind of the phase where you're feeling out what the NPC likes, and then there's the phase of actually trying to get them to like you. And you can also have the different parties and the different events that may have their own things going on. There's a lot of ways to bring these subsystems to life, and you need to take those, while at the same time leaving it in the abstract. And then my final point is to let players give creative answers to things. If somebody uses a spell that you think is worth a successful or critically successful skill check, mark down that critically successful skill check. Like if they're in a survival scenario and you need them to start a fire and somebody says, well, I have Produce Flame, the spell that creates fire in the name, and they say, I cast Produce Flame, you can say, yeah, that'll be a point. And if you make me a survival check to get Kindling, I'll let you take like a +5 to your roll or whatever. Just something absolutely absurd. But like, you can allow these creative solutions, allow these spells. Maybe the +5 is too much, but maybe you can say, now getting Kindling to burn, you don't need to roll as high. And things of that nature. But I think all this is very abstract, so I'm going to go for the example of what I did in my game for the Naval battle system. And I'm going to talk about my intent behind basically everything here. And I will mention, this was patched in after the session because I felt like it could be better. And I got the idea for doing a naval system via victory points from a Dumble Builds video, which you can see up at the top iCard up there. But naval battle. I set up 3 phases, boat on the horizon, siege range, and firearm range. And it ends with the boarding, which is just basically a normal combat. And this is meant to represent ships battling each other, and then eventually the crew board each other's ships and there's a big fight. This is a very classical thing you see in a lot of like pirate movies and things of that nature. So that's really where I drew inspiration from. And so default DCs are leveled based on the DC of the foe. For my adventure, that was DC 30 because that's a clean number. It's the master DC. And that felt like the level of the ship. Like, that's the idea. And then I said allow for ±5, which is very hard or very easy checks based on the creativity of answers and how much it makes sense. You want to encourage players to take creative answers, and if they're really stretching to use a skill, you can say, okay, I'll let you roll for it, but it is a stretch, so the DC will be higher. And my players were totally cool with that. And I made note to make it feel more like a battle, that when entering siege or firearm range, the enemy ship then can roll a die based on the number of players you have and take away that many points. I also have the boarding thresholds scale with the amount of players you have in the session, because that way it doesn't like break if you have more or less players than the subsystem was written for, just because I run for variable players. This is how I designed the subsystem. Phase 1 was boat on the horizon. They see that there's an enemy out there, they know they are hostile, you now get time to prepare. And so you have 10 minutes to do preparation stuff. And this is where players can do things like, ooh, I'm going to man the sails with a survival check. I am going to start getting cannonballs next to all the cannons using athletics. And they start saying stuff like that. And they can do all the stuff as long as it does not interact with the enemy in any way. Then the enemy fires their cannons, some of their victory points go away, and they're in siege range, where the players can then start justifying using cannons and other weapons like them to fire back on the enemy ship. Easy enough. They then do that, the kineticists ask, hey, can I add fire to the cannonballs? Because I'm a fire kineticist, I can create fire, and thus I can make cannons blast further. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. You can make a skill check for victory points using kineticist attack roll. Sure. And then at firearm range, that's when longer range guns and bows started coming into play. So weapon infusion kineticist was able to do 100-foot range increment fire shot, and we rolled for how effective that was. And we started just like letting closer range stuff start to be a factor. And then it's boarding, and the difficulty of the encounter scales with how many points the party actually has. I think this is a very clean way to run a Navy battle. I don't need to deal with the vehicle subsystem and go about how much feet can these things move, what's their exact positions. I'm able to leave it in that more abstract area that encourages players to be creative, encourages players to participate, and it's in a way that still kind of makes sense in the fiction. So this is how I generally like to use victory point subsystems. This is an example of one that was done for like basically a part of a session, and there are 3 phases where the players would be rolling, and I think this is a pretty intuitive way of breaking stuff up. But again, there are a lot of other ways to use subsystems to apply for a lot of creative areas. So I'd recommend reading through this section, looking at all the different examples. And yeah, that's about all I have for this video. So that was my video on how to use subsystems. Yep, subscribe, I think.